You never really got into it. While billions of people are refreshing their feeds before they've fully woken up, checking notifications mid-conversation, feeling that specific emptiness after scrolling for 40 minutes, there's a massive group of people who just never built that reflex, not burned out, not detoxing, never really started. And behavioral psychology has a very specific explanation for why. First, let's be honest about what social media actually is. Not what people claim it is, what it does to the brain. B. Jay Fogg's research at Stanford's Persuasive Technology Lab laid out exactly how these platforms are engineered. They run on variable reward schedules, the same psychological mechanism behind slot machines. You post something, sometimes you get a response, sometimes you don't. The unpredictability is the point. Your brain releases dopamine not on the reward itself, but on the anticipation of it. Layer on top of that what psychologist Leon Festinger identified in 1954 as social comparison theory, the hardwired tendency to measure your standing against others. Social media didn't invent this drive. It gave it an infinite scroll and a real-time leaderboard. And there's the social bonding piece. Dr. Robin Dunbar at Oxford, whose research on primate social groups produced his famous number of 150, found that humans are wired to maintain a stable circle of relationships. For many people, social media became the mechanism for keeping hundreds of weak ties alive at once. Not deep, wide, but real. So when people say it keeps them connected, the neuroscience backs them up. That makes what comes next more interesting. Something was offered to everyone. Somehow, with you, it didn't take. People assume you didn't understand how it worked, or tried and fell behind. The implication is always the same. Some basic social currency got distributed, and you came up short. Here's what the research actually shows. B.J. Fogg's behavior design work demonstrates that automatic habits like checking and scrolling require consistent repetition inside a specific context before they calcify. Before the loop becomes something your brain does without deciding to. If someone exits that cycle before the pattern sets, the compulsion simply never forms. Not because they failed to engage, because the mechanism never got its foothold. Your attention was never captured. That's not a failure to adapt. That's a filter that worked before anyone asked it to. Here's what social media does that nobody really talks about. It turns experiences into content. The meal gets photographed before it's tasted. The view gets framed before it's felt. The conversation gets edited into a caption before it's over. You get called disengaged for not doing this. Like you're missing some social instinct everyone else developed. Like presence without evidence doesn't fully count. Dr. Linda Henkel at Fairfield University published research on this exact mechanism in Psychological Science in 2014. When people know they're documenting an experience for external sharing, their ability to recall that experience in detail gets weaker. You remember the post more than the moment. People who never got into social media don't carry that second track. They're not producing a record of the experience while having it. They're just in it. Fully. You've been called unsocial for this. You might actually be the most present person in the room. The social pressure is real. People will assume you're hiding something, or hopelessly out of touch, or that your absence is a quiet verdict on their choice to be there. And here's what's worth understanding, that discomfort from the other side is documented. Research in social norms shows that when someone opts out of a widely shared behavior, their non-participation creates a low-level threat for those who opted in. Not because you said anything, because your absence can read as disapproval even when none was intended. One man tried it once, created a profile, posted twice, then set his phone down and forgot about the app entirely for 3 weeks. When someone asked why he wasn't active, he said 4 words. I don't know what I'd say. Not a protest. Not a manifesto. Just someone who genuinely didn't have the drive to perform his existence for an audience he hadn't chosen. That answer confused people more than any explanation would have. Sometimes people who never got into social media aren't making a statement. They just don't have the engine for that kind of self-presentation. And there's real psychology behind why some people were wired with it and some weren't. People will tell you that you're missing out, that real connections happen on those platforms now. That staying off means staying behind professionally, socially, in ways you won't notice until it's too late. Attention is a resource. Social media platforms are engineered to extract it not as a side effect, but as the entire business model. Dr. Gloria Mark at UC Irvine spent years measuring what digital fragmentation actually costs. After a digital interruption, it takes the human brain an average of 23 minutes to fully return to the original task. 2 hours on a social feed doesn't just cost 2 hours. It restructures the cognitive architecture of the entire day in ways most people never calculate. People who never got into social media didn't preserve their attention through willpower or discipline. Their attention simply wasn't captured in the first place. That's not something you trained. That's something you kept. But here's the question worth sitting with. Is opting out a genuine reflection of how you're wired, or just something you never examined? Because there's a difference between someone who processed what social media was and quietly moved on, and someone who simply drifted away from something unfamiliar without ever choosing either way. Both look identical from the outside. One is clarity. One is something else entirely. Only you know which one it is. Most people, at some level, used social media as identity infrastructure. Here's what most people do. Post what they achieved, who they're with, what they think. The record becomes the self. And when you don't have that record, people can't quite place you. No profile to scroll through, no visible history to form an opinion from. That ambiguity makes people uncomfortable, and they fill the gaps themselves, usually with something unflattering. Sociologist Irving Goffman described self-presentation as the active management of impressions, the performance of different versions of yourself for different audiences. Researcher Dana Boyd, who spent years studying how identity forms in digital spaces, found that online identity runs on a different logic entirely. You curate, edit, publish. The self becomes a product, subject to constant revision. People who never built that product built something else. Their sense of who they are didn't form in public, and it doesn't need public engagement to stay intact. If you're a man, other men will read your absence as one of two things: arrogance or irrelevance. Not because you claimed either. Because you're not performing your life for their approval, no wins on display, no signal that you need them to notice, and they feel the absence of that performance as a judgment on theirs. Your quiet makes their noise feel embarrassing. That was never your intention, but it's the effect. If this is the kind of psychology, the science behind how some people are simply wired differently that you want more of, follow for more on the psychology of quiet intensity. Somewhere along the way, the culture decided that a life undocumented is a life half-lived. That proof requires witnesses. You just never agreed to that. Proof of a life doesn't require an audience. Which sign felt most like you? Drop it in the comments. And if you know someone who spent years fielding questions about why they're not on Instagram or stopped answering altogether, send this their way. Sometimes having a psychological explanation changes the whole conversation.